who's had an amazing, and no hyperbole, amazing career for the last 30 years or so.
Hey, now, no.
No?
I would be drawing comics when I was a very small, I mean, yes, I was drawing comics when I was a very small kid, but I mean, you're making me get paid for it when I was a very small kid, which would have been good, but.
But I mean, to look at your art, I can tell that you've been doing it your entire life.
That's the only, well, it's not the only thing I've wanted to do, but it's one of the only things I've wanted to do. I've wanted to, when I was little, I wanted to be like a princess, astronaut, geologist.
All at the same time.
Ballerina, veterinarian, all of these things, artist, all at the same, cartoonist, artist, all at the same time. And then, you know, as the years went by, each one of those other things kind of just fell by the wayside. And arts, I mean, it's not like I'm not interested in a lot of those things, but as far as following through on something, I certainly followed through on comic. Well, comics never fell away from me. So
now, what was the thing that made you, like, of all those things you wanted to do, what was it that cemented in your head that being an artist was the thing?
I just always was drawing, kept drawing. I was drawing from the time I was little, and take this. No, now's the time for the terrible squee and feedback. I don't know. It's like when I first discovered comics or cartoons, it was Charles Schultz Peanuts. And so that was in the newspaper, but then I found that there were little pocketbook editions of Peanut stories, and I got those, and I just kept drawing Peanuts. You know, it's like I told my mom when I was little, when I grow up, I'm going to draw Snoopy. And my mom told me, well, you know, the reason you get to see Snoopy is because somebody already draws him. So if you want to draw, you can draw something like Snoopy, but, you know, somebody already draws that. And so I went about then creating my own comics, which had the character of B-Dog, which was a capital letter B with a nose on the top and tail on the bottom and the back and ear on the side with a little spot on his back. And he was kind of, if Snoopy was made out of the capital letter B. And he lived with these two, which was really funny at the time. You'd think he would live with a little girl just like me, but he lived with these two old people. He lived with like grandma and grandpa. And pretty much it was on loose leaf notebook paper. It was 4 panels on page. And there were hundreds of these too. The gist of nearly every B-Dog comic was the grandma was making some kind of a treat or food for the grandpa, and B-Dog would somehow steal that food, and then the grandpa would either be chasing the dog or shaking his fist at the dog saying, B-Dog! And it's just like over and over again. The only thing that really changed in there was like the food. It's like, it's breakfast now, or, you know, or they're outside and it's a picnic, or it's dinner table, and which is another weird thing because I like to draw food. A lot of my comics have, you know, recipes and treats and things in there, and I really like to draw that, and I guess that was way back from when I was like 5 years old as well. But I went from, you know, drawing that B-Dog and wanting to draw Snoopy to discovering Archie comics, and then all I wanted to draw was Archie comics, and then I found a Marvel comic. It was Thor or something like that. I can't remember which one at the time. And the way that I discovered those, it's not like I went to the newsstand or my dad was into comics and brought comics home for me, which he actually ended up doing later, but not because he'd been, you know, like running down to the newsstand and picking things up. We lived on a block where the 2 houses on the end of our block, there was a moving sale. And the moving sale was not just your regular, we have to move, so we're getting rid of some stuff. It was, we're digging around the edges of these 2 houses, and they're being picked up and put on trucks and moved across to the other side of town because the city was going to make a municipal parking lot where the houses were. So I remember walking down the alley and going into the, you know, garage or the basement of one of the houses, and they were selling things, and I had like some money with me, and there was a fruit crate filled with old comic books.
Yeah.
And I was like, what's that? And so it was filled with Archies, like old Archies, like 1940s and 1950s Archies. And, you know, lady sold it to me, I don't know, she might have sold it to me for like a quarter or something like that. All I know is it, you know, really wasn't very much money. And I went home, and that pretty much cemented things for me. I'm gonna, you know, I just was enamored with Betty and Veronica and Archie and Jughead, and started copying that after that.
Wow.
And then just started loving comics. I mean, it was like, I just went, this is what I'm gonna do.
Was it just the stories themselves, or you just like, you like to draw and the art just intrigued you, or was it just a combination of all, just wrapped up in the whole thing?
I don't know. I guess a combination of everything. I can't, you know, I don't know how everybody else's experience was when they first picked up a comic. It's they picked it up, they understood it, they knew how to read it, you got it, it made sense to your brain, and it told a story, and it just, and then, I don't know how other people were introduced. Maybe other people said, you know, here, you must read this thing. But for me, it was like, it was something that I found, and it was a natural way for me to enjoy a story.
Yeah.
And then after that, to tell a story, because then after that, all I wanted to do was tell stories like that, based on whatever thing it was that I had found, you know. So Archie stories, I eventually made it up a bunch of homemade comics again with a ballpoint pen. It was a very long time before I even worked my way to a pencil, because it was just straight with whatever paper was laying around, the back of paper. The neighborhood kids and my brother and I, we lived in the suburb of Chicago, really close to the city, so we have alleys. I don't know if you guys have alleys here.
Yeah, we got some.
But we also lived on a busy street, so you couldn't play like some other kids would play in the street, you know, play kickball and all this kind of stuff if they lived on a side street. We played in the alley, because we didn't, you know, of course you played in backyards and in people's houses, but a lot of times it was like, and nobody would let their kids do this nowadays, I'm guessing, but it's like, you know, you go out at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then your mom's yelling for you at dinner, and she doesn't know where you've been since then. But we were in the alley, and one of the alleys that was adjacent to our alley had an office building in it, and we would go look in the dumpsters, because you're kids and there's junk out there, and you're going to build your own fort. And one of the dumpsters was always filled with office paper. Like, I don't know how many people worked at this one office, but they would make 1,000 memos for, you know, maybe there were, even if there were 100 people that worked there, they had 900 sheets of paper that were left over. And remember one day my brother and I were coming home with like a box full of paper. And all I could think of was there's like 2 lines in this paper, and look at the whole back paper, that I can use so much of that paper. And I would make my comics on the back of these papers and make
taking me back
adventures of the kids in our neighborhood grown up to be teenagers, like in the Archie comics.
Yeah.
So my brother was one of the main characters, and this little girl down the block named Elise, who had a crush on my brother, and she was younger, so she was very demonstrative in her affection. She would literally chase him around the neighborhood going, "My lovable husband, my lovable husband," which is pretty intense if you think about it for like a 5-year-old girl.
She sounds like Sally from Peanuts.
I guess so, yeah, really. She was, you know, but she would chase him over there and try and tackle him and kiss him. So I figured, you know, I grew her up, and I had my brother grown up, and she was always trying to, you know, get my brother to date her, was the whole shtick of this thing. She had crazy schemes, and, you know, she would, you know, do amazing things to try and catch his attention. And then, let's see, I was the sensible older sister one, and I looked like Midge from Archie Comics. That was the hairdo I gave myself. But I made like a cast of characters of like all the kids in the neighborhood were part of the things. But the comics were called Elise, which doesn't really roll off the tongue. You know, it's like, and I tried to, you know, copy the font and do everything, and did that up until I discovered Spider-Man, and then everything was, and then X-Men and Marvel Comics, and then everything was a superhero comic after that.
So, and you, on your own, you drew superhero comics?
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed, like, I don't know, it seems like there's a lot of women artists who don't draw superhero comics. They usually draw, you know, what's quote-unquote female comics. But you and Amanda Connor seem to be the exception, that you have an easy time with that.
I wanted to be Spider-Man, or Wolverine without the hair. Or, well, actually, no, like the comic that did it for me, that pretty much, I saw, there were some Spider-Mans and some Thor and stuff, which I used to think were scary comics.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because I think there were a couple in that big container of Archie comics, and, but my brother and I would come home from school every day for lunch, because that's how our grade school worked. And we would get the box of comics, and we would sit with our sandwich or our soup or whatever my grandmother had made, and we would reach into the box and pull out a comic. Well, it got so that we'd read these comics so many times that we could pull a comic out and look at the cover and know every story in it. So we would always reach down to the bottom of the box, because that's where the ones that we kind of maybe would have forgotten something about were. And one time, there was nothing. We went through this whole box, but there was the scary comic was in there still. And I'd never read the scary comic yet.
Yeah.
And I pulled it out, and it was like Thor, and it was some some big thing which John Buscema, like somebody's being beaten in the first thing. You're coming right in the middle of some crazy story, but it was like Norse mythology. I love Norse mythology. Look at this. It was dramatic and amazing and entertaining, and it had like magic powers, and who doesn't want any of those things? It's like
good point.
And I just thought, I want to be one of those guys.
Yeah.
It's like I felt the same type of character identification that I guess a guy would, and I think that's when I started to notice that in the drugstore and in the grocery store there were sections where there were comics, and then I started actually buying my own. And I think I got it was during the Dark Phoenix saga of Claremont Byrne X-Men, and came smack into the middle of like Run for Your Life, Kitty Pryde.
Yeah.
And it was like, and I looked like her.
Yeah.
Well, forget about it. And who was there right after that? Phoenix. Bam! That car was destroyed. It's like, and then you want to be her. And then here's Storm. It's like, here are three women that I want to be like. There's not one person who's like powers. I would say, no thanks. I don't want any of those.
Well, it does seem like for women who get into superhero comics, X-Men is the gateway drug, because you have so many strong female superheroes.
Well, and
in
the
team.
strongest. Like, I ate the sun. And I'm feeling a little bit excited about it, and I'm like, ha ha ha, and I'm coming for you.
Yeah.
If you're a shy girl, you don't have that kind of, outgoing nature, that's very helpful. It's like it's living vicariously through other characters.